The soft knock of Chinara's broom against the front steps echoed in the early hush of dawn. Her movements were quiet, measured, like the rhythm of her life, predictable, respectful, never demanding too much space. She swept the dust from the clay porch as morning light filtered through the palm fronds, golden and hesitant. Inside, the firewood crackled gently under the iron pot where millet porridge simmered for Ao's breakfast. This was her ritual, every day for 8 years. Ao, her husband, was the village's finest carpenter. His hands were known for coaxing shapes from stubborn wood, beds that didn't creak, doors that never stuck, shelves carved with intricate patterns. When the chief's new hut needed furnishings, it was Ao they called. When the church roof collapsed, Ao's ladder was the first to rise. Chinara watched him build the world around them, steady and proud, yet their own house remained quiet. Childless. Their marriage had begun with promise. Chinara remembered the way her mother had wept during her wedding procession, tears of joy and envy all at once. "You are blessed," she'd whispered. "Ao is a man who builds, not breaks." In those early years Chinara had believed it. She believed it still, though belief was a softer thing now, worn down at the edges by grief. She had lost 3 children. The first had not even formed properly, barely a shape beneath her ribs before blood and pain had taken it away. The second had been a boy, she was sure, kicking like a drumming bird, gone at 7 months, the midwife helpless, her own body too tired. The third was a whisper, a hope too fragile to speak aloud. Since then her womb had been a quiet well. And Ao, though he never scolded or sighed, had grown absent. The village saw Ao as a man of strong arms and few words, always courteous, always offering his hand where needed. He greeted elders with both palms up and never charged the poor for coffins or crutches. But beneath their praises lingered murmurs Chinara could feel, though none dared bring them to her door. "He returns late," they said in market corners. The workshop lights burn past moonrise. "He travels to Aguada often, too often." Chinara never asked where he went. Not because she didn't want to know, but because she feared she might not survive the answer. Instead she stayed in motion, cooking, sweeping, praying. She wore her silence like a shawl, draped tight to shield against the chill of suspicion. She smiled when the neighbor's toddler called her Mama Chinara, and her hands didn't tremble when other women came to her for herbal teas to boost fertility. She gave without resentment. Or so she told herself. In church, she sang softly behind her veil, the kind of hymn voice that held back tears. When she knelt, she did not beg for children anymore, only for peace and that Ao's absences were not what they seemed. She believed, needed to believe, that love was a patient vine and that one day it would bear fruit. Not just in children but in truth, in presence. When Ao came home that morning, his shirt smelled faintly of sawdust and something less familiar, something sweet and foreign, like the perfume sold in bottles at the town junction. He kissed her cheek absently, his mind already on the half-finished cabinet in the yard. Chinara noticed but said nothing. She placed the steaming bowl of porridge before him, refilled his water calabash and returned to her seat by the window, hands folded. He ate in silence, eyes on the grain of the wooden table he had made with his own hands. The same table where she had once laid tiny baby clothes, never worn. He didn't notice her watching. Or perhaps he did but chose not to look up. That too had become part of their rhythm. The rooster crowed again. Life moved forward. Chinara would visit the herbalist later to pick up balm leaves for the widow down the road. Then she'd stop by the tailor to see if the hem on Ao's tunic had been stitched properly. These were the acts she controlled, the quiet gifts she gave to a world that often forgot to return them. She found comfort in them, like prayer beads between restless fingers. In her heart, she whispered to the child she never held, "If you still live in some corner of heaven, pray for your father. Pray he finds his way back home." And so, while the village murmured and the wind carried questions into every open window, Chinara held fast to her faith. Not the noisy kind that demands miracles, but the quiet one that waits with open hands, trusting that one day, even broken things bloom. And if they did not, she would still have her peace. The harvest festival rose like a drumbeat in the bones of the village, calling people from compounds and riverside farms into the broad square where baskets of new yam and clay jugs of palm wine formed a bright mosaic. Chinara smoothed the blue wrapper she had kept for joyous days and thanked the ancestors that at least celebration still had room for faith. Ao, promised the guild's prize again for his flawless carpentry, was expected at midday. Chinara imagined him lifting her hand when his name was called, the gesture they practiced in their first year of marriage, before miscarriages and late-night absences gave rehearsed tenderness a brittle edge. Heat shimmered above the drummers, Cowrie anklets rattled on the ankles of teenage dancers swirling like sparks. Spice, smoke and cassava leaves perfumed the air so richly that even grief tasted sweet for a heartbeat. Chinara knelt among the wives of the crafts guild, palms resting on her thighs, head high and hopeful. A bell rang, silencing the drums. From the western path Ao appeared, but not alone. A striking woman in an amber wrapper walked beside him, coral beads framing a face more radiant than midday. She held his elbow, yet her posture suggested ownership, not petition. Gasps rippled outward like circles from a stone dropped in water. They mounted the dais. Ao greeted the chief, voice steady. "Great father of our valley, may the gods bless this harvest. I present my second wife, Ifyananya, daughter of Trader Obina." Second wife. The phrase thudded through the square, rearranging every familiar line of Chinara's life. Chinara's heart surged, then seemed to drop into her stomach. She had not been told, not even in whispers. Color drained from the blue wrapper that moments ago felt like promise. Now it felt like costume on the wrong stage. Eyes turned toward her, some pitying, some avid for drama. She bowed her head, pretending to adjust a bracelet so tears would fall unseen. Ifyananya accepted greetings without shrinking behind her husband. She laughed, corrected mispronounced names, and met each elder's gaze with unwavering confidence. When a drummer complimented her beads, she responded, "They are nothing compared to the woman who taught me courage," and gestured, not to her mother but to the crowd itself, claiming space as birthright. After accolades were distributed, Ao placed the ivory plaque he had won into Ifyananya's hands. She raised it high, declaring, "May our household serve twice as faithfully for this double blessing." The crowd applauded, but Chinara heard a crack somewhere inside herself, as though one of Ao's flawless joints had split under hidden strain. When celebration turned to feasting, Chinara carried calabashes to the communal table, hands steady through will alone. Children darted past chanting rhymes, oblivious. Ifyananya joined her, uninvited, to ladle soup. Their arms brushed. Ifyananya whispered, "I will not hide in shadows, senior wife. I respect you, but I refuse invisibility." Chinara replied only with a tight nod, the ladle trembling once before she mastered it. Toward dusk, torches were lit for the moon dance. Ao approached Chinara at the edge of the square, cheeks shining with sweat and triumph. "We will talk tonight," he murmured, as though discussion could mend public devastation. She answered, "We will pray first," and stepped back, giving him room to carry Ifyananya onto his shoulders when the drums commanded. Humiliation's heat rose again as she watched the new bride laugh from that elevated perch, braids swinging like victory banners. Later, beneath a cooler sky pricked with early stars, the household returned. Ao led Ifyananya to the workshop where a spare cot awaited. He mumbled apologies about unfinished building plans. Ifyananya laughed, an easy ringing sound, saying, "I have slept on boats and in markets. A carpenter's floor is luxury." Chinara, carrying leftover plantains, felt the laugh slice her skin not because it was cruel, but because it was effortless. When they had eaten, Chinara swept the courtyard, small circles whose pattern steadied her breath. Ifyananya emerged with a lantern and extended it, polite but unyielding. Their eyes met, one brimming with questions, the other with answers refused. Finally Ifyananya spoke. "I did not learn of you until he paid my bride price. Had I known, I would have demanded your blessing first." Chinara swallowed a jagged lump of pride. "Blessings belong to those who ask the ancestors before they act," she said, voice like dried leaves. She turned away before tears could glisten. Inside the marital hut, Ao sat on the edge of their bed, tracing the grain of a cedar post as though seeking counsel from wood. "I wanted to spare you more sorrow," he began. Chinara loosened her head tie, movements controlled. "You wanted to spare me?" "By multiplying it in public." The question fell softly but hit like iron. Ao's shoulders sagged. "I thought another womb might ease the burden." "The burden of whose emptiness?" she asked. He had no words. Silence pooled between them, viscous and dark. At last she whispered, "We will finish this conversation when the feast ends in my heart." She lay facing the wall. He lay beside her hours later, but sleep kept to her side of the mat alone. Outside, dogs barked at drums still echoing along the riverbank, and termites clicked within rafters that Ao's hands had carved. Chinara folded her palms beneath her cheek and prayed without sound. "Let dignity wrap me tighter than shame. Let tomorrow's sun find me still standing." She summoned memories of each lost child, not as wounds but as witnesses. Their absence now formed a circle around her, reminding her she had survived emptiness before and carried on breathing. Ifenanya's laugh drifted from the workshop, a bruising melody, yet Chinara recognized in it no malice, only life insisting on itself. She forgave the woman in that moment, though not the man. Forgiveness tasted bitter, but it freed her tongue from curses she did not wish to speak. She closed her eyes and fashioned silence into armor for the day ahead. The days after the festival settled like hot coals under a thin rug, quiet to the eye, but ready to scorch at the slightest step. Life returned to its rhythm, but that rhythm had changed. Ifenanya refused to move quietly through the household like smoke through a crack. She filled every space she entered, physically, vocally, spiritually, with presence that demanded to be seen and heard. Ao had expected her to accept the small rear hut he had hastily refurbished, tucked behind the main compound like a broom closet. But Ifenanya took one look at it and laughed, full and sharp. "I did not leave my father's home to be folded into a corner," she said. "If I am wife, I share the fire, the table, the floor and the roof." Ao barked back at first, "This is how we do things here." But she only crossed her arms and stared him down. That night, she rolled out her mat next to Chinara's in the main room. Chinara said nothing, simply adjusted the pillow to give her space. Morning duties had once been Chinara's unspoken territory, sweeping, cooking, washing Ao's wrappers, trimming herbs for evening stew. Ifenanya refused to follow that quiet pattern. She woke early, took the broom from Chinara's hands, and began drawing her own circles in the sand. "Today I will cook," she announced one morning. "Tomorrow it will be you. We are two women, not servant and queen." Chinara's lips pressed into a line, but she allowed it. Not because she agreed, but because the fight wasn't worth it, not yet. Ao's discomfort grew by the day. He wasn't used to questions, especially not from within his own home. Ifenanya questioned everything. Why did he need to travel twice a week to Aguada when he had 3 unfinished commissions in the village? Why did the shop ledger show payments he never reported to Chinara, who had always helped track expenses? Where did the teak wood from Chief Medu's land go, the one that never became a bed frame? At first, Ao dismissed her questions with half smiles and vague answers. "Trade secrets, my dear. Village matters. Not for women to worry about." But Ifenanya wasn't raised on polite submission. She was a trader's daughter. Numbers and honesty were her language. "I worry about what touches my roof," she replied once, planting herself at the shop door, refusing to move until he accounted for a missing 5,000 naira. Chinara, who had once watched Ao in silence and faith, now observed Ifenanya with cautious curiosity. The new wife was bold but not cruel. Sharp but not cutting unless provoked. There were nights when Chinara would wake to see lantern light flickering near the corner shelf, and Ifenanya hunched over Ao's old journals. She wasn't snooping like a jealous woman, she was studying. There was calculation in her eyes, not spite. She wrote notes in a small book of her own, careful and deliberate, and often paused to stare at the spine of the ledger before turning the page. One such night, Chinara rose to use the pot and passed Ifenanya still at the corner. She paused, saw the other woman's brow furrowed deep in thought. "You do not sleep much," Chinara said, voice low but not unkind. Ifenanya looked up slowly. "How did you do it?" she asked. "Do what? Live next to him for 8 years and never ask what he was hiding?" Chinara stood in silence for a moment, heart thudding quietly in her chest. "I trusted. Or maybe I feared what asking would cost." Ifenanya's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Trust is beautiful," she said. "But it should never be blind. That's how people lead you off cliffs smiling." The following morning, as dew still clung to the mango leaves, Ifenanya sat across from Chinara under the cooking shed and watched her sort dried okra into woven bowls. There was an odd silence in the air, thick like the breath before rain. Then, with startling directness, Ifenanya leaned forward and asked, "Do you really know the man you married?" Chinara didn't look up right away. Her hands moved steadily, fingers separating the good pods from the spoiled without pause. But her stomach clenched. Not because she was unsure of the answer, but because she was. "I knew the man I married," she replied carefully. "The one who promised to build a life with me. Who stayed awake the night we lost our son, pressing cool cloths to my forehead. That man I knew." Ifenanya's eyes narrowed. "And the man who lies about his accounts? The one who keeps land documents in a dead cousin's name? The one who disappears for nights with no explanation?" Chinara's fingers stopped moving. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he's not who either of us thinks he is," Ifenanya said. "And I'm not going to let him build this house on lies, not when I'm inside it too." For the first time, Chinara met her gaze not with silence but with something else, Alarm, yes, but also recognition. The same storm lived in both their chests now. She set the okra aside and wiped her hands slowly. Some lies, she whispered, are roots. Deep and tangled. Pulling them out can break the whole ground. Then let it break, Ifeanyi said, voice unwavering. But at least we'll know what we're standing on. The breeze lifted a corner of Chinara's wrapper, cool against her skin, as if the wind itself had paused to listen. For years she had buried questions deep beneath obedience. But now, with fire in Ifeanyi's eyes and a rising ache in her own heart, she began to wonder if silence had bought her safety, or only delay. The next afternoon the sun burned high against the zinc roof of the workshop, but inside the half-lit space Ifeanyi felt a chill crawl along her arms. She had come to fetch a chisel Ao said he needed, yet the tool's absence was suddenly unimportant beside the unease pricking her skin. Wood shavings lay like curled feathers on the floor. The scent of fresh cedar mingled with something metallic, secretive. Her gaze drifted to the back wall where several planks had been removed weeks ago. One brick sat slightly forward, its edge too clean in the dusty mortar. Instinct tugged, she pressed her fingertips against it. The brick rocked inward with a soft scrape. Behind it, dark space yawned. Heart thudding, she slid 3 more bricks aside until a leather-bound ledger wrapped in faded indigo cloth appeared. She drew it out carefully, wiping grit from its cover. The goatskin was cracked, the clasp tarnished. No title. She opened the first page and inhaled sharply. Ao's handwriting, precise, slanted, filled the lines, but the name at the top read, Obiora Arins. She knew that name, Ao's cousin, dead 5 years from river fever. Beneath, rows of figures recorded land purchases near the northern ridge, plots by the oil road, all stamped with a blood-red symbol. She flipped pages. The pattern repeated. Further on, she found columns marked with a different sign, interlocking rings crossed out. Beside each, dates, villages, sums labeled return of bride price. 3 separate entries, 3 different women. The last refund occurred barely a month before Ao courted her. Ifeanyi's breath snagged. The walls seemed to pulse. She turned another page and her own name leapt out. Ifeanyi Obina, bride price, amount paid, followed by a blank column, space left perhaps for another refund. Fury and shame rose together, hot enough to steal breath. Memory lit a different town, a different season. 2 years earlier she had journeyed to the port of Ibeno to sell her father's spices. Evening draped the markets in lantern gold when a stranger offered to carry her baskets. His smile was shy beneath sawdust-dusted lashes. He bought pepper he claimed to dislike just to linger. They shared roasted fish beside the wharf, talked of wide rivers and the patience needed to shape stubborn wood. When he spoke, the future sounded like a shelter with 2 chairs carved by his own hand and room for laughter that never ended, and she believed him. He wore sincerity the way other men wore hats, easy to remove, impossible to suspect. Now she saw the charm for what it was, a practiced tool like any chisel in his hand. She closed the ledger, pressing her palm against the worn leather to still its rapid heartbeat. Then she replaced the bricks, arranging them exactly as before. The chisel she had come to find she located, but left deliberately crooked on a shelf so Ao would not wonder why she lingered. Night fell slow and violet. She sat outside beneath the Udala tree, notebook balanced on her knee, copying essential details while they remained hot in her mind. Dates, sums, villages, symbols. Chinara's cooking fire flickered beyond the doorway, sparks lifted like small prayers. Ifeanyi watched her senior wife stir the pot, silhouette gentle, unaware. She weighed confession against caution. Chinara deserved truth, but truth delivered without proof could shatter an already fragile woman. She decided to hold silence one more sunrise, until evidence could stand taller than denial. She mapped possibilities. Public accusation at the next council meeting would draw swift inquiry, but Ao, clever with words, might claim forgery. Private confrontation risked intimidation or hiding evidence. A middle path formed. Approach the chief's assistant Equim, trusted for fairness. Show him the ledger discreetly, secure protection, then face Ao before witnesses who valued justice over pride. She tucked the plan away, letting it cool like tempered metal. Inside, Ao returned late, so late even owls had ceased calling. He smelled of palm wine and river mud. He glanced at her beneath heavy lids, then praised the neatness of the yard, ignorant of the storm beside him. She offered water and watched him drink, noting the tremor in his hands. Did guilt shake him or merely fatigue? She gathered that clue as a seamstress gathers a thread, storing it for later stitching. In bed she lay awake, the ledger's weight replaced by a heavier truth. Behind Ao's skilled hands lurked rot, and its roots stretched deeper than she had guessed. Her anger was a torch, but she must wield it with care lest it scorch the innocent along with the wicked. Hours before dawn, rain whispered on the thatch, steady and soft. Chinara's breath fluttered in sleep, fragile as moth wings. Ifeananya reached across the space between their mats and rested 2 fingers lightly on the older woman's arm. Part oath, part apology for secrets kept a little longer. Chinara murmured but did not wake. The rain thickened, drumming patterns on the tin roof, concealing every sound that hidden cavity might make. Ifeananya closed her eyes and pictured bricks sliding again, ledger in her hands before Elder Equim's calm gaze, villagers leaning in as lies unraveled like rotten rope. She felt fear, yes, but fear braided with purpose is something else entirely. It becomes momentum, a river that refuses its own dam. When the first rooster crowed, she rose quietly, folded her notebook into the waistband of her wrapper, and stepped into the wet dawn. She would buy yams at market, an ordinary errand, and stop by the council clerk's hut on the ridge. She would smile politely and ask for a moment of the assistant's time. In her eyes, though, would burn the knowledge of women scorned and promises broken, a flame no rain could quench. Behind her, Ao snored unaware, dreaming perhaps of polished wood and accolades, ignorant that the walls hiding his secrets had begun to whisper, and soon they would shout, through every beam and rafter. It was just after the rain had cleared, when the scent of wet earth still clung to every leaf and the sky turned the soft color of roasted yam, that Chinara heard the sound, barely a whimper at first, then a sharp, stifled sob. It came from behind the workshop, near the narrow strip of shade where Ao had planted cassava, now overgrown and neglected. Chinara hesitated, hand wrapped around a bundle of washed wrappers, and followed the sound like a ghost drawn to a buried truth. She found Ifeananya crouched low beside the wall, arms wrapped around her knees, tears slipping down her cheeks without shame but also without witnesses, until now. Her strong, proud shoulders were curled inward, trembling. Chinara had never seen her cry. It didn't seem like something Ifeananya knew how to do. But grief, when it breaks, doesn't ask permission. Chinara said nothing at first. She lowered the wrappers gently to the ground and sat beside her, legs folded to the side, letting the silence speak. A few minutes passed before Ifeananya wiped her nose with the back of her hand and whispered, "He lied about everything." Chinara stared ahead, her voice quiet. "Lied to both of us." Ifeananya nodded, bitterness etched into the line of her jaw. "I thought I was the storm in his life. I thought you were the calm. But now I see we were both misled. Different songs, same betrayal." Chinara's heart, long hardened by unanswered prayers and silence too thick to breathe through, cracked slightly open. "I used to think maybe it was me," she said. "That my body was too weak. That I failed him." Her eyes clouded. "But the truth is he was never really present. He gave me a roof, a name, a bed, but not himself." Ifeananya reached for a pebble on the ground, rolled it between her fingers. "He gave me a promise of freedom. Said he wanted a woman who could speak. But when I began to speak, he tried to make me small." For a moment, both women sat in the hushed glow of the afternoon, no longer wife and rival, but 2 women holding the same wound from different angles. Chinara leaned back slightly, letting her head rest against the wall. "I always feared speaking," she murmured. "I thought it would make things worse." "It won't fix everything," Ifeananya said. "But silence feeds the lie. And I'm done feeding lies." The next morning, they walked together to the old weaver's hut to pick up fabric they'd both ordered. On the way, an elderly woman stopped them, Mama Ojeki, the village storyteller. Her voice shook with age but her eyes gleamed sharp as river glass. "You two remind me of someone," she said, peering at them closely. "Nkemjika. Do you know the name?" Chinara frowned. "No." Mama Ojeki cackled, shaking her head. "Of course you don't. Most forget her. She was Ao's first wife. Married her when he was barely a man. Tall girl with laughter like flute music." Her tone darkened. "Then she disappeared." "Disappeared?" Ifeananya asked. "How?" "No one knows. One day she was here, next she was gone. Ao said she ran off. But the midwife back then, before she died, swore the girl was with child. Almost due. Then, poof. No baby. No burial. No truth." Chinara's stomach turned. "And no one asked?" "Oh, some did. But Ao's father was still alive then. Respected. And the girl's family newcomers. No one raised their voice loud enough. Shame and fear are brothers." As they walked back, the story hung between them like smoke. Ifeanyanya's jaw was tight. "He's done this before. Erased women." Chinara's steps slowed. Her silence had once protected her. Now she saw it had merely tucked her into the shadows where harm was harder to name. That night, under the dull glow of a kerosene lamp, Chinara stood with Ifeananya in the center of their shared home. She looked at the walls, the beams, the chairs Ao had carved, beautiful and strong like the man himself. But now she saw the cracks, the ledger, the silences, the missing woman, all the careful lies tucked into corners like dust. "I want to speak," she said, voice trembling but firm. Ifeananya looked up from the basket she was mending. "Then speak. I will stand beside you." Chinara nodded. "Not just for myself. For Nkemjika. For the children who never came. For the girl I was before he taught me to shrink." The next day, Chinara stood in front of the Women's Cooperative Hall. She had never spoken at a village gathering before. She wasn't known for noise, only for kindness, and sometimes people mistake quiet for weakness. But her voice, though soft, carried. She spoke of choices stolen, of trust broken, of silence that lets shadows grow. She didn't name Ao, not yet, but those who knew knew. Ifeananya stood to her right, head high, arms crossed like a sentry at the gate of truth. When she finished, the murmurs rippled like rain on a tin roof. Some looked stunned. Others nodded, lips tight with old memories. Mama Ojeki sat in the front, tears tracking her worn cheeks. Back home, Chinara lit a lamp and placed it in the window. "What's that for?" Ifeananya asked. "A signal," Chinara said. "To remind me I'm no longer hiding in the dark." Ifeananya smiled, the kind that carried no victory, only respect. "Then tomorrow we take the next step." Together they stood under the stars, two women once broken, now mending thread by thread. The midwife's hut sat on the edge of the village, half swallowed by creeping vines and cassava shrubs. Time had bent the walls and faded the paint, but the air inside still smelled of crushed herbs, wood smoke and old prayers. Chinara stepped through the beaded curtain first, her heart thudding not with hope, but with something heavier, something like dread. Ifeananya followed, her eyes scanning every shadow, every shelf, as though answers might be tucked between jars of dried roots. Old Mama Ebel sat on a woven mat near the hearth, her back curved but still unbowed by age. Her hands, once so steady, trembled slightly as she stirred a pot of bitter leaf tea. When she saw Chinara, her lips parted in surprise, then slowly curved into a faint smile. "Ah, the gentle bird returns," she said. "You've grown quieter since I last saw you." Chinara knelt before her, folding her hands. "Mama Ebel, I came to ask you something I should have asked long ago." The old woman motioned for her to sit, then looked past her to Ifeananya. "And this one, she has storm eyes. You bring fire and water both." Ifeananya dipped her head respectfully. "We come seeking truth." Mama Ebel exhaled as though she had known this day would come. "Then speak." Chinara's voice was small at first. "You helped me with my pregnancies, you saw everything. Was it me? Was I too weak to carry?" The midwife set her stirring stick aside and reached for Chinara's hands. Her fingers were cold but firm. "You were strong. You bled like a warrior and wept like a mother before her child is even born. It was never you." She paused, eyes narrowing. "But there is something I never told you. I didn't think it was mine to speak." Chinara's breath caught. "I overheard something once," Mama Ebel continued. "It was after your second loss. Ao came to pick up a tonic. He thought I was outside. He was speaking to a man, I don't know who. His voice was sharp. Angry. He said, 'No child should carry my blood. I will not curse a new life with what lives in me.'" The words dropped like stones into still water. Chinara blinked. "He said, he didn't want children?" The old woman nodded slowly. "He said it with pain, not cruelty. Like a man running from something in his shadow." Ifeananya stepped forward. "What did he mean? What lives in him?" Mama Ebel shrugged. "That he never said. Only that he wouldn't pass it on. I thought, maybe it was madness in his family. Or a shame too heavy to name. But he never returned for the tonic." Chinara's hands slipped from the midwife's grasp, falling limp in her lap. Her eyes blurred. For 8 years she had blamed her womb, her body, her prayers. She had swallowed shame like daily bread. And all this time, Ao had been the one with secrets sewn under his skin like cursed tattoos. "He let me suffer," she whispered. "He watched me grieve. And he said nothing." Ifeananya crouched beside her. "He built his lies carefully. You trusted him. That's not weakness, Chinara. That's love misused." Chinara stared into the fire. "But why marry at all? Why pretend?" The old midwife answered before Ifeananya could. Because some men would rather build a house of lies than live alone in truth. A childless marriage gives him pity. A dead wife draws suspicion. But a barren woman, she takes the blame quietly. Silence filled the room, thick and bitter. Ifeanyi stood pacing. He was afraid. Not of us, but of whatever secret lives behind his blood. He chose control over confession. Chinara nodded slowly. And I carried that silence, thinking it was mine to bear. Mama Ebel rose carefully and placed a warm cloth in Chinara's hands. You are not cursed. You are not broken. Do not let one man's fear become your truth. Outside, the afternoon sun had dulled to gold. The two women walked back through narrow footpaths, passing children playing with slingshots and old men slapping aware stones on boards. But everything felt different now. The past had shifted. And with it, Chinara's understanding of herself. She stopped near the village well, hands gripping the stone rim. He robbed me, she said quietly. Not just of children but of my right to choose. I lived in mourning while he lived in hiding. Ifeanyi rested a hand on her shoulder. Then let's bring him into the light. No more shadows. Chinara nodded. No more shadows. No more shame. Whatever Ao feared, it would no longer define her. Not as a wife. Not as a woman. That evening, as they prepared supper together, Chinara did not lower her gaze when Ao walked in. Her eyes met his directly. Not accusing, not pleading, just seeing. And he, for a flicker of a moment, looked away first. The market was alive with color and chatter. Women in bright wrappers haggling over cassava, traders lifting crates of tomatoes, the aroma of fried akra weaving through the air. Laughter rang out near the spice stalls, and drums tapped lightly as a youth troupe danced in the distance. It was a day built for celebration and commerce, but tension moved like a thread beneath the noise. Ifeanyi stood near the center path, her wrapper tied firm, hair wrapped high, posture rigid like a pillar waiting to be struck by lightning. Beside her stood Chinara, calm but unyielding, eyes sharper than they had ever been in public. The weight of the last few weeks pressed against them both, but now was the moment. Truth no longer whispered in kitchens or behind curtains, but spoken into the air where everyone could hear it. Ao approached from the western path, shoulders wide as ever, face set in the confident calm that had once charmed traders and chiefs alike. He carried a carved cane though he did not need it, a symbol of status, not necessity. When he saw Ifeanyi standing before the elders' pavilion, his steps faltered for the first time. Ifeanyi, he said smoothly, smiling, you look radiant. What is this gathering for? The festival isn't for another week. Ifeanyi didn't smile. She turned to the elders, seated beneath the thatched canopy with their red beads and embroidered robes gleaming in the sun. She bowed respectfully, then raised her voice just enough to still the nearby crowd. Elders, forgive the interruption. I come not as a wife today, but as a woman seeking truth for our household, and justice for those Ao Arins has deceived. A collective murmur rose. Ao's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? He whispered. But she had already untied the cloth bundle from beneath her arm. With steady fingers she unfolded the ledger, the very one she had retrieved days ago, hidden behind false bricks in his workshop. She held it high, letting everyone see its worn cover. This book, she said, was found in my husband's possession, hidden where no honest man hides his records. It bears the name of Obiora Arins, his cousin who has been dead for 5 years. Yet through this name, Ao has bought land, moved money, and made agreements without witness. The crowd stiffened. Ao laughed strained. It's nothing. A misunderstanding. That ledger. Ifeanyi ignored him. She flipped the pages with crisp precision. Here are dates. Here are payments. And here, she tapped one page, voice like thunder hidden in calm clouds, are entries for the return of bride prices. Not 1 but 3. Refunds made for marriages the village never saw, never blessed. Gasps rippled through the market. Ao stepped forward. This is madness. Chinara stepped into the circle now, speaking softly. Is it madness to ask why women vanish? Why wives carry shame alone while you carry no burden at all? The elders exchanged glances. One, a silver-haired man named Elder Omika, leaned forward. Obiora Arins, he said, his voice raspy but commanding. That name was used to buy land near the floodplains 3 seasons ago. I signed the boundary line myself. But Obiora was already buried. I remember. His mother wailed at my gate. The market went still. Even the goats stopped bleeding. Ifeanyi took a breath. There is more. Ao claimed to seek children with us, me and Chinara, but he never intended to be a father. He once told a friend, overheard by a midwife, that no child should carry his blood. What lives in his blood that he dares not pass on? Fear? Madness? A curse? Ao's face darkened. You twist my words. You chose silence, Chinara interrupted, her voice firmer now. You watched me mourn and you said nothing. You made me carry the weight alone. Enough. Ao barked. You too are poisoning this village with lies. But the damage was done. Elder Omika stood, his walking stick slamming the ground. We will investigate. Bring the ledger. If this is truth, not even your skill with wood can shield you. Ifyananya handed the book to the chief's assistant, who opened it and scanned the pages. His brow furrowed deeper with every turn. From the crowd, a woman cried, Is that wine Kemjika vanished? Was she another lie? Another voice, What did he do to her? Ao tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time he looked small, not the man who carved doors and won prizes, but the man behind those doors hiding from the knock of his own truth. The market buzzed with low voices, some angry, some mournful. Traders closed stalls. Women clutched their wrappers tighter. The illusion was broken. Ifyananya and Chinara stood shoulder to shoulder as the assistant tucked the ledger beneath his robe. You will present yourself to the council tomorrow, he told Ao. Bring any documents you wish to defend your name. Ao glared at them, face hollowing. You think this will end well for you? Chinara for the first time smiled. It's already ending well. Because it's ending with truth. Ifyananya added, You wore many masks, Ao. But masks fall. And now the village sees your real face. They turned and walked away together, leaving him alone in the center of the market. No longer the man everyone admired, but a question finally laid bare. The elders gathered beneath the ancient Irako tree, its thick branches casting solemn shadows over the judgment circle. The breeze barely stirred, as though even the wind dared not interrupt what was about to unfold. Ao stood at the center, his wrapper tight at the waist, jaw locked, eyes darting from one elder to the next. Behind him, villagers whispered and watched, faces half-shielded, some with pity, others with sharp expectation. Elder Omika cleared his throat, voice as grave as the stone that marked his lineage. Ao Arins, we have seen the ledger. We have heard the testimony of your wives. The land bought in the name of the dead. The marriages undone in silence. We have read your record of lies. Now we ask, what is it you have been running from all these years? Ao stood stiff, silence clinging to him. Then slowly, as if surrendering not to the elders but to the heaviness inside him, he spoke. I have never wanted to harm anyone, he began, his voice rough. I only ever wished to protect what little good I had. The crowd leaned in. Chinara and Ifyananya stood together, stone-faced. My mother, Ao continued, eyes far away, was a woman respected by some, feared by others. She practiced things that were old, forbidden. She would disappear into the grove near the riverbank at night. They said she was seeking wisdom. But others whispered of rituals, ones that twisted life instead of healing it. He swallowed. When I was 12, my younger brother died. No sickness, no accident. He simply stopped breathing in his sleep. The healer found strange marks on his skin, symbols that my mother wore in her private room. Then 2 cousins, both boys, died before turning 5. Quiet deaths. Sudden. No warning. Gasps broke the hush. Ao's fists clenched. My uncle confronted her. She said nothing. Just stared. He said the curse came through the men, not the women. That no male child would live long, or if he did, he would bring shame to his mother's name. He paused, then whispered, I didn't believe it. Not then. But when I reached manhood, I began to see the signs. Nightmares that followed me from her hut. An illness that vanished when I left her grove forever. And then, every woman I courted who fell pregnant lost the child. Every single one. The first was in Kemjika. A murmur rippled outward like a pebble hitting a still pond. I loved her, he said. When she told me she was pregnant, I was terrified, but hopeful. I tried to stay calm. I prayed. But one day she collapsed. I buried her myself under the trees. I told no one. I didn't want the shame to follow me. Chinara's breath caught in her throat. Her knees nearly buckled, but Ifyananya steadied her. Ao continued, hollow and pale. After Nkemjika there were others. Women I never truly allowed to enter my heart. When they miscarried, I called it fate. But after a while, I made a decision. He turned toward Chinara. When we married, I had already made arrangements. I paid a man in Aguada to sterilize me. A permanent solution. I told myself it was mercy. That no woman should carry my blood. That I would never risk burying another child. I told myself I was protecting you from grief. Chinara's face twisted with disbelief. You let me blame myself, for years. You let me beg the gods, burn offerings, lie awake thinking I was broken. And all the while it was you? He nodded once, ashamed. I thought, if I took another wife, one with stronger spirit, maybe the curse would break. I hoped the blood had thinned. I hoped, in foolishness. Ifeananya shook her head. You used us. You gambled with our lives. Not because you were cursed, but because you were too afraid to be honest. Elder Omika rose slowly. Truth has come late, but it has come. We must speak to the council. The forbidden grove will be cleansed. Your mother's name will be written into the archive of the old ways, and prayers made to sever her shadow from this village. He turned to Chinara and Ifeananya. You are not bound to him now. His lies severed that cord. The village remained silent as Ao lowered his head, defeated not by punishment but by the truth he could no longer bury. Later that night, Chinara sat beside Ifeananya under the starlit sky, the air thick with the scent of cleansing incense drifting from the grove. He thought he was protecting us, Chinara said softly. But he was only protecting himself from being known. Ifeananya nodded. And in doing so he buried not just truth, but the women who trusted him. They sat in silence, knowing they had unearthed not just Ao's secrets, but the freedom to begin again. The dawn after the elder's verdict arrived hushed, as if the village itself waited to see justice take shape. In the council enclosure mats formed a circle and a single stool awaited Chinara, summoned as first wife and wronged party. She entered wearing the indigo wrapper her mother had woven for her wedding, head high, eyes clear. Elder Omika rose. The council recited Ao's ledger of lies. Land in a dead cousin's name, bride prices returned in secret, the paid sterilization that mocked his vows. Omika concluded, custom grants you freedom. You may dissolve this union and claim restitution. 2 cows, 12 cloths, 50,000 naira. A murmur of awe rippled among the onlookers. Chinara stood. Fathers, I leave this marriage, but I will not carry its stains in silver. Let the money serve widows and orphans. I ask only the woodworking shed I kept and the farmland my father left me. With tools and soil a woman can feed many futures. The elders conferred briefly, then nodded. The workshop and river slope were decreed hers alone. The clerk unrolled parchment and dipped his quill, scratching Chinara's name beside the survey markers, then heating wax to seal the decree. When the stamp lifted, a red blossom spread, official proof her future no longer answered to any man. Women at the edge of the enclosure lifted their hands in quiet applause. The gesture felt like wind at Chinara's back. Before she left, Chinara knelt and touched forehead to earth in gratitude, not to the council but to the ground that would soon answer to her hands. The eldest matriarch hummed approval, tapping her staff 3 times. Ifeananya, though younger, stepped forward too. I will manage the accounts of Chinara's school, she announced, voice steady. The ledger of his deceit has taught me that truth must also be recorded. Omika nodded, eyes glistening. As the women departed, an unexpected sound rose. Drums, small and insistent, struck by village girls who fell in step behind the 2 wives down the path, stitching music into the fabric of change. Outside, Ifeananya waited, spine straight, face calm. The 2 women clasped hands before walking to the square where Ao stood island by empty space. His carved cane shook. Admiration had drained from the crowd like water from cracked clay. Ifeananya spoke first. I take nothing of yours but the lesson. Secrets rot the house from within. She laid the infamous ledger at his feet. Build again if any timber trusts you. Ao's gaze drifted toward Chinara. I never wished you harm, he said, voice hollow. Yet harm grew in the silence you planted, she replied. Now I plant something better. She touched Ifeanyanya's arm and they turned away together. They passed market stalls and the smithy sparks, reaching the workshop door. Chinara pressed her palm to the cedar frame. This place will become a school, she said, seeing benches filled with girls learning to shape their own dreams. Ifeananya smiled, already picturing honest ledgers, pages free of false names. By dusk the village buzzed with news. Both wives had moved to a small hut beside the farmland. Neighbors brought clay pots and blankets, singing songs of new beginnings. Children danced amid fresh curls of wood from the first plank Chinara cut herself. Back in the big house Ao wandered alone. Cedar and varnish lingered, suddenly stale. He walked corridors touching door frames he had carved, hearing night insects tapping like hammers on a coffin of reputation. Beyond the fence, the forbidden grove rustled, reminding him of a mother's shadow and the steep price of fear. No footsteps approached, no laughter threaded the air. The silence he once prized settled over his shoulders like a ragged cloak. From the distance rose the hammers in the reclaimed workshop, shaping tomorrow from honest lumber. The rains had come early that year, gentle but insistent, softening the clay roads and filling the village air with the scent of wet hibiscus and rebirth. Where once the sound of chisels had spoken only of one man's pride, now laughter and voices filled the old workshop with new purpose. Beneath its broad eaves and open windows, women sat weaving mats, carving spoons, and shaping soap from oils scented with morina and lemongrass. The space that had once sheltered secrets now overflowed with stories, with freedom, with future. At the center of it all stood Chinara, her back straight, her voice steady, her hands calloused from both wood and leadership. She wore the same indigo wrapper from that fateful council day, only now it carried no echoes of sorrow, only the deep strength of a woman who had turned her wound into a well. "Your fingers are too tense," she told a young girl beside her, guiding the child's grip gently over a carving knife. "Let the wood guide your hands. You do not fight the grain, you dance with it." The girl nodded, dark eyes focused. Her name was Reby. Her face held the quiet beauty of someone who had learned too young how to disappear. But she was learning to return. 1 year ago Chinara had found her. Or rather, the girl had been brought to her by a midwife from a neighboring village, a woman who had once treated a laboring stranger nearly a decade earlier, a woman left at their doorstep by a man who vanished before her child was born. The details had been thin at first. The mother had survived but disappeared soon after childbirth, taken in by a herbalist on the outskirts of the region. Her voice had been broken by grief, her mind caught between fragments of names and unfinished lullabies. But Reby, her daughter, had grown, quiet, curious, always asking questions about places she did not remember visiting and names she only half heard in dreams. Chinara hadn't needed proof. She had seen Ao's cheekbones in the girl's face. But more than that, she had felt something stir in her when Reby touched the chisel for the first time and said, "It feels like it knows me." Reby was the child of Nkemjika, the first wife, the one whom everyone thought lost. She was the living answer to a mystery long buried, and Chinara had claimed her not as a relic of pain, but as a branch reaching toward light. Today the girl sat beside her under the workshop awning, carving a smooth, shallow bowl. Nearby, other women braided raffia for market baskets. A chalkboard at the back bore the names of new apprentices, each one a girl once told she could only serve, never lead. Chinara watched Reby's small hands flex and pause, then carve again. "You see," she smiled. "The wood does not rush, so why should we?" "I want to carve my name next," Reby said shyly. "At the bottom of the bowl." "You will," Chinara replied. "Every woman must leave her mark. That is how we remind the world we were here, and we mattered." Far away in the Delta city where the oil roads ran wide and metal towers clawed the sky, Ifeanyi walked barefoot through the gates of a safe house painted sunflower yellow. Children's chalk drawings covered the cement steps. She carried notebooks under one arm and a folded map marked with red pins, the homes they had already visited, the girls they had already helped. She had returned to her hometown not to forget, but to begin. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her limits. Each girl she taught to read a ledger or write her own story was a blow against the system that once swallowed her voice. Her lessons weren't just about literacy, they were about seeing clearly, naming power, refusing to shrink. That morning, she had met with a teenager rescued from a wealthy businessman's estate. The girl had been promised education and luxury, had received isolation and manipulation instead. Now she was learning to balance accounts and growing coriander in a planter box by the back door. In her journal that evening, Ifeanyi wrote, "Some men build houses of lies. We build havens of truth. And they last longer." She added a note for Chinara, though the letter wouldn't be sent until the weekend. "I saw a girl today who reminded me of the way Reby stood when she first picked up a carving knife, afraid but ready. Thank you for giving her roots. She will grow taller than both of us." Back in the village, dusk settled over the cooperative. The women began cleaning, storing away tools, folding cloths. Chinara remained behind with Reby, who was finishing the final line of her name at the base of the bowl. She carved carefully, tongue sticking out a little in concentration. Then she looked up. "Was he really my father?" Chinara did not flinch. "Yes," she said. "But your name belongs to you, not to his shadow. Do you think he ever wanted to find me?" Chinara paused, then answered softly, "I think he was afraid of what you would show him, his truth. And sometimes people hide from truth their whole lives." Reby nodded slowly, then ran her fingers over the edge of her carving. This bowl will hold things. Food. Water. Maybe flowers. And stories, Chinara said gently. All things worth carrying. The girl smiled, her eyes glowing with a peace Chinara knew would one day stretch into strength. As night fell, and the stars pricked the dark like tiny eyes keeping watch, Chinara lit a small oil lamp and placed it on the ledge near the doorway. Reby leaned against her, the bowl in her lap. Why do secrets make people sick? She asked. Chinara looked out into the dark, toward the grove that had once held whispers too heavy for the world. Because secrets buried under shame never stay silent, she said at last. They rise, louder than thunder, when truth is ready to reign. And somewhere, far beyond their village, clouds gathered, slowly, steadily, until one day they would open and let that truth fall freely on every roof, every seed, every girl learning to speak her name into the world without fear.